Let me turn my camera on. Sorry about that, guys. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another 11th Ward community meeting. This is the second one regarding 3815 South Ashland. This is for a cold storage building for the Karis Company. We have with us again a whole team of people representing the company, and I'm going to hand it over to Rob just to remind everybody kind of where we are on this. This community meeting is part of site plan review process that the Planning and Development Department requires now for any project of this size and scope. This is a newer rule. Rob, I think you can probably speak a little bit more to that than I can. But this is a building that the company current is, I believe, actually, I'm not gonna speculate. I'm just gonna let Rob explain everything to you. I have his presentation. Rob, are you ready for me to start sharing?
Sure. Yeah, that's great.
Right. And we did already have a preliminary meeting about this. It was way too short. We didn't have enough time, even though it went way over. So we wanted to add a second meeting so that more people had an opportunity to ask questions and be able to have you guys be available for other things that you wanted to share that we may not have been able to get to previously.
Absolutely. And happy to do so. As you mentioned, Alderwoman Lee, I'm Rob Gamreth and I represent the developer Karis Cold Storage. This is the continuation of the meeting that we conducted about 3 weeks ago. What I thought we would do is maybe at a high level, just summarize our presentation and some of the components, and then try to respond to some of the questions that came up at the last meeting, and obviously then address any new questions or any follow-on questions. As you mentioned, this particular project, which is under the use category of warehouse, freight movement, and wholesale use, is required to go through a site plan approval process. So if the use itself in PMD 8A is permitted as of right, the project, however, being under 10 acres, does fit within the newer requirement for the city's rule that we go through site plan review. So what that requires for this type of use is that we conduct a traffic study, we conduct an air quality study, we submit those to CDOT and to CDPH respectively for their review, and then have a community meeting to share the results, discuss the project, talk through concerns, questions, and so forth. And then ultimately, after the community meeting is when the project is ripe or ready to be submitted for site plan review approval. So we are at the point now where we have shared the traffic study, we have shared the air quality study, we have had the first community meeting, and now are having this follow-on meeting to address other issues. In terms of maybe talking through the project itself, maybe Mike, you can just again refresh folks recollection a little bit as to what's being proposed in terms of the actual facility, cold storage facility, and maybe focus in on the design elements and how the project was designed to fit within the surrounding area and so forth. And then we can talk about the studies as well and get into questions.
Certainly. So this is designed as, first of all, I'm Mike Cody. I'm with Ware Malcolm Architects. We're the architects on the project. We've been working with both the city and Karis, putting together different site plans that we've been reviewing with the city. And this facility consists of about just under 100,000 square feet. So it's 99,407 square feet of 50-foot clear height freezer area. It's called a multi-temp freezer. We don't know the exact user, but we do have the ability to make the entire building, well, the entire freezer portion of the building, like 20 below zero. We can
Michael, do you want me to advance the slide? I don't know what's
certainly if you could, that would be great. If you could go to the site plan.
Give me cues and I will move everything forward.
You got it. I'm sorry. I should have done that. So this is where we currently stand. So the facility consists of a cold dock, which is a refrigerated dock, so that trucks can provide both shipping and receiving of cold material. So that be it frozen steaks, whatever the material is that can then go into and out of the freezer or cooler facility. So it's designed to be multi-temp, which means we can control the temperature and create different environments for different users. There's also a small utility portion. As you can imagine, the utilities in a building such as this are unique, and we need a little bit of room for that. There's also a very small office component. So it's about 2,100 square feet of office. The site will also separate the truck circulation and the car traffic. We have, gone to some great lengths of, setting the building back from Ashland. We are providing a 15-foot setback. We originally started at a 0 lot line, which is permissible, and most of the other buildings in the neighborhood do have that. But because of the bus stop and such things as the pedestrian traffic on Ashland, we coordinated with the city and provided a 15-foot setback. We're also providing a little an artist sculpture area for to help complement the building. If you can advance some of the, well, actually, let's stick on this slide one more time for a few more moments. We have some trailer storage at the rear of the site there. You can see our pump house. A pump house is basically to circulate the water at a pressure we need for the height of the building. We need to provide a little bit more water. You can imagine in freezer building, the sprinkler pipes need to be a dry pipe system, which is a special system that's not, fully charged with water. It needs to be dry because otherwise it would freeze, fairly obvious. But the pump basically provides instantaneous pressure if the sprinklers are ever needed. So that facility kind of sits in our parking lot back there in our truck dock. If you could advance to the next slide, that would be helpful. And again, I won't go too into detail. So we're showing some of the contextual, the neighbors' buildings in context to our site. And if you can advance one more, we kind of highlighted the different facilities here. We can go back to the slide as needed, but we're kind of putting our site in context of the others. And then if you advance to the next, actually 2 more slides, like the next one shows the zoning. And then we start getting into the building architecture. So cold storage facilities, they require, a certain type of material and colorization of the material in order to maintain the warranties. You can imagine the temperature change. You don't want to make a black box, right? Because it would really, just gain all the heat, and it wouldn't be very conducive for the cold environment we're creating on the inside. So if you could advance to the next slide, this is kind of a view showing the office corner. And then this is a view along the Ashland Avenue side. And we tried to keep it, give it some contextual, relationship to the neighborhood, tried to break up the long panel, the long sea of white panels with a little bit of colorization. And you can see the downspouts coming down the side of the building because those are external when you're in a cold storage environment. Then if you could go to the next slide, I feel like I'm talking way too much. This is a loading dock view of the building, just how the trucks would facilitate the storage and circulation of goods. Then these are just the flat on boring elevations, but they certainly show the building. I think the renderings give it a little more, do a little more justice to it. Is that good, Bob? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That, as Mike pointed out, and just to highlight, a lot of thought was given into the orientation of the building and where the most active portions of this facility are, have been aligned and are designed to face other commercial and industrial uses. Really an effort made to make the Ashland Avenue side, which is still a commercial corridor on Ashland Avenue, but then as you progress further west, you do move into the neighborhood and residential uses that has been de-emphasized. A lot of landscaping. It will be one of the only buildings that has a setback in this corridor and will be heavily landscaped. So that design and those particular types of decisions were made in order to make this particular facility be an asset to the community and to mitigate impacts that otherwise, had they put the truck docks facing Ashland, moved the traffic in off of Ashland, things that might have had a more negative impact, but now have been mitigated.
If I may, we also
Yeah.
tried to create a queuing environment for the trucks in the neighborhood. There are a lot of trucks that really, hate to say it, but they queue in the public way. So in other words, they may be waiting for another truck to finish its circulation. We tried to create that environment within our property lines, which is always a more effective tool for mitigating the truck traffic in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Jenny, do you want to, transitioning now maybe to talk through at a high level or refresh folks' recollection on the air quality study that you performed and what you found through your efforts in the study?
Yeah, that would be fine. I think my stuff comes after the traffic study in the PDF, so it's probably a couple right there where the photo is. Yep, there we go. So good evening, everybody. My name is Jenny Conan. I'm a senior environmental scientist with Bar Engineering Company, and I prepared the air quality modeling report for the project, which involved modeling of 3 different pollutants as required by the new guidance and municipal requirements for projects such as this. We evaluated NOx, PM10 and PM2.5 from both the stationary and mobile sources from this project. The column on the right is showing the different pollutants and standards we evaluated, and the project's impacts were modeled results were below all of the significant impact levels that would dictate a further refined modeling approach for the area. If you want to scroll to the next slide, Alderwoman, that'd be great. This is all from the public posted modeling report. So this is a figure showing what we modeled for the project. You can see Ashland and Pershing. The facility is outlined in orange with the building as a dark blue rectangle oriented north and south. Within the facility fence line, we have 2 sort of stationary sources. One is in green at the southeast corner, which is the space heating component emissions. Thank you. And then to the north of that, it's like a purple box is where sort of the idling emissions for the trucks as they're stationary and unloading their goods, as was shown in one of those earlier figures. We also have the vehicle, the exhaust emissions from the trucks as they drive through the facility as the light blue periwinkle. And then the 3 boxes on the southern end represent sort of the on-site employees when they arrive and leave, and that's the parking lot. Outside of the facility are the different roadways that we modeled the project emissions based on the traffic study and the likely routes that trucks would take, both trucks that are loading and unloading, and also employee or general light smaller vehicles traveling along those roads. The orange dots represent receptors that we that have X and Y locations, and the model calculates an air concentration at each of those dots, and we evaluate all of the impacts for those 3 pollutants at each of those dots, and the maximum modeled air concentration is compared to the significant impact level standards to determine what the project's potential impacts are. So if you scroll to the next slide, that'd be great. So this is a table summarizing the modeling results for the project. We looked at, as required by the new guidance and the recommendations, we looked at the particulate matter less than 10 microns, less than 2.5 microns, and the NO2 or nitrogen dioxide. Each pollutant has a different averaging period. The PM10 is a 24-hour or daily standard, and the PM2.5 also has an annual averaging standard, and the NO2 is a 1-hour averaging standard. The SIL, or significant impact level, is represented as a unit of concentration of a pollutant per mass of volume air. And the SIL represents a small fraction of what's called a National Ambient Air Quality Standard, which is the standard that dictates sort of overall human health. So the SIL is a fraction of that, which is deemed a project that models below that SIL is considered insignificant and unlikely to contribute to any potential air quality violations. The project impacts are next to that SIL column, and you can see that all of the modeled project emissions, all of the modeled projects impacts are all less than the pollutants that are evaluated, and the percentage of each of those to the SIL is on the far right. Do you want to go to the next slide? I have just a few pictures from the modeling report. And sorry if it's a little hard to make out. But like I said, this is from the report, so you can download it and look at it yourself and read through a little more detail of the analysis. On the left is the 24-hour PM2.5 impacts. And we have a star showing the maximum modeled impacts are right along that fence line on the southeast corner. And we have different colors and sizes of the receptors to show how the concentrations decrease with distance. So you can see that the maximum impacts are all below the standards, but they're also really focused, centralized right along that fence line, and they decrease pretty rapidly with distance. So we see that the highest modeled impacts are focused right along that fence line. And the same thing for the 1-hour NO2 SIL. On the right, the maximum impact is along that fence line. And we also can see that the air concentrations decrease with distance. And like I said, this is showing sort of the degradation or the decrease in air concentration. And all of these results shown on here are all less than that significant impact level as well. And then to summarize, this evaluation followed the recommended guidance. We used the EPA regulatory model, the most current version, and most recently available meteorological data of data site representative of this area. We looked at project emissions from the space heating, the vehicles, from the passenger vehicles and the trucks, and modeled them assuming they were operating 24 hours a day. And these results show that the project's impacts are all less than the significant impact levels. And we would expect that the project demonstrates that going forward, it would not have any significant impact on the surrounding air quality for the area.
Thanks, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe we'll have Sarah summarize the traffic study, and then we can jump into questions. And I'm sorry, I took us out of order, so thank you for
No problem.
adjusting.
That's okay, we can roll with it. Well, I do see some familiar faces, some new faces. I gave a brief summary of what our traffic study included and what it concluded last time, but I'll again give a brief update so that everybody's up to speed, since there are many lucky people on this call who don't have to read traffic impact studies all the time. So in summary, the general makeup of a traffic study is to go out in the field and collect existing transportation data. In this case, we also adjusted that data to quote unquote pre-pandemic conditions, since as everyone knows, there tended to be a decrease in vehicular travel and pedestrian and bike activity during the pandemic. So we adjusted it up based on historical data. We then estimated how much traffic this development would add and prepared a model to look at what the existing and future operational conditions in this area would be after completion of this development and other background growth in the area. And then we use that comparison to identify what potential impacts may result from this site. And together with that review and our knowledge of best practices in transportation operation, we identified some improvements. And similar to the air quality study, I will say that our study is posted on the City of Chicago's air quality website, so it can be viewed in full at that location. We can move on to the next slide, please. So to give a brief summary of how much traffic is projected to be generated by this proposed development, we used a national reference manual that looks at different industrial uses that offer similar types of operations to this proposed cold storage warehouse across the country. It is a standard industry resource for traffic engineers, and we use that to look at the square footage of this development and how much traffic it may generate as a result. So in summary, what we would expect on a daily basis from a development of this size is roughly 200 trips per day. And a trip is defined as either an inbound or an outbound movement. 140 of those trips would be cars, and then 60 of them would be trucks. And trucks includes both smaller box trucks and larger semi trucks, depending on what the tenant uses to conduct their operation. We also specifically focus on what we call the morning and evening peak hours, which align with the rush hours of traffic on the adjacent street, which allow us to look at the highest period of traffic that's already on Ashland and Pershing, and then add traffic from this development on top of that to get a critical hour. And here you can see we have roughly 20 total trips generated by this development during those peak hours. For some context, I will mention that the daily traffic on Ashland is about 21,000 trips, and on Pershing, it's about 16,500 trips. And we can move on to the next slide, please. We did get a question in the last meeting about existing truck traffic. We checked the IDOT database, and they did not provide information about what the daily truck traffic is on these adjacent streets. But fortunately, at Sam Schwartz, we did have information both from 2017 and from last year, 2021, when we initiated this particular study, to look at how many trucks are on those streets during those peak hours that I mentioned. So as you can see, generally speaking, in 2017, the truck traffic during the peak hours on those two streets adjacent to this property were higher than they were in 2021. And so we wanted to share that information in total. And you may recall from the last slide that we are projecting about 60 truck trips per day as a result of this development. And so for context, these are the highest single hour in the morning and in the evening. So the AM and PM peak collectively represent 2 of 24 hours in a day. And the projected truck traffic from this development was 60 trucks for a 24-hour weekday period. We can move on to the next slide, please. And we also did get a question about pedestrian and bike volumes in this area. So we assessed the numbers that we were able to quantify when we were out doing our data collection for this project. And generally speaking, there is pedestrian and bike activity compared to other areas, some other areas of the city. It's relatively low. The highest was near Pershing and Ashland, which makes sense because there are some transit stops at that intersection. And generally speaking, the pedestrian and bike traffic is higher in the evening. We can note that the bikes that were counted riding on the street ranged from 0 bikes to 8 bikes in total for any given intersection that you see on this figure at the right. And then for the combined pedestrian and bike volume in crosswalks, the range was between 0 and 20 pedestrians and bikes in total per intersection. And in both cases, that highest end of the range was at Ashland and Pershing, where we saw the most activity. And we can move to the final slide. So in general, our conclusions identified that the site traffic would account for a small percentage of the traffic on the adjacent streets, ranging between 0.2 and 0.3% of the traffic on Ashland and Pershing. But we did identify some opportunities to increase safety at these access points and therefore on the external streets near the access points, specifically by prohibiting inbound left turns into the access on Pershing Road. That access is very close to the signal at Pershing and Ashland, and there are a lot of lanes to cross and there are a lot of driveways in that area. And so it's our opinion it would simply be safer if employees and truck drivers were informed in advance to direct themselves up to 38th Street instead and use that access too. And so to facilitate that, while we would recommend that trucks and cars be able to utilize both accesses so that they can function properly despite that left turn restriction that we recommend. These recommendations were part of the study that was submitted to CDOT and went through their review prior to them giving us the okay to post it on the city website and come to this meeting. So I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that may come up. And back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Sarah. So Alderwoman Lee, that I think gives everybody a good refresher on the project and the reports and so forth. I know that there were a couple of items that came up in the last meeting that we either said we would come back and try to address in a little more detail or ran out of time to address. One of those was a question about sustainability and some of the sustainable features. Mike, if you could maybe spend just a minute on, I know you went back and looked at that, but and had previously shared the city's sustainability matrix, but if you can provide a little more color to that.
Sure thing. So we, at the outset of a project, we know we are set to achieve 100 points, and we are working with the development team, including the construction professionals and the developer, civil engineer, all of our engineers, to develop a strategy. We have kind of a preliminary strategy, but is often at this stage of the project that strategy gets analyzed a little bit more further. What can we do to enhance the sustainable features in a development such as this? So we are working on it. We know we need to achieve the 100 points, and I think we have a good strategy forward. We have kind of a preliminary sustainability checklist that's circulating amongst the team.
The other item that came up, and I think it was very close to the conclusion of the last meeting, was a question, I think it was in the chat box, regarding demolition. I did not get the gentleman's name, and hopefully he's on, but Mike Stella, are you on, and maybe can just talk about how that will ultimately be handled when the project is moving to that phase?
Absolutely. Hi all, my name is Mike Stella. Excuse me. I am project executive with Development Solutions, Inc. We are the general contractor for the project. What we had talked about when we sent out the required notices as part of the application for demolition, all the abutting neighbors received a letter. We had a couple of comments from a couple of the neighbors asking, timing, and we're obviously concerned with how the building was going to be taken down. We said that we could have let's call it a pre-con meeting where we could meet with our demo contractor, ourselves, a representative of Karis, with each of the neighbors on the site, and kind of discuss some items. Rob said he would be more than happy to help set that meeting, and we'll take care of that. Another thing is the building, I think the owner of the building that abuts it in the north west corner. And it's kind of a white square on the slide that's actually in there right now, right above where it says site. We are very close to that building. All of the demolition of the existing buildings would be taken care of and performed just like we would along Ashland, because we are right up against the sidewalk. Essentially, the building would be taken and pulled inward into the site mechanically and manually in different components, and pull it in and away from the abutting property or from the west sidewalk level. And that way, you know, we're not swinging a wrecking ball that way. There, it's all being brought from the perimeter inward into the site. It's done slowly and methodically, again, to protect and to be as safe as possible, given our locations to the public.
And I think you previously mentioned as well, Mike, in conversations regarding the demolition, that the projected demolition subcontractor is a highly experienced contractor that's done a number of demolitions within the city of Chicago.
Yes, and in fact, the demolition company is the company that did the demolition of the old Wrigley buildings down at 35th in Ashland just a year and a half or so ago. And it was very similar. It was right on, there were a number of buildings that were right on top of the sidewalk, butted right to it. And one of them being an 8-story building, and it's done the same way. Again, systematically, slowly brought inward. They also extensively use, water to prevent the dust. We've set up the new guidelines call for dust monitoring. We have all that under contract with them. We even talked about one of the neighbors to the north does something with wine, and they were concerned with vibration, and we even offered them that we could do vibration monitoring as we start to go through the site. The building isn't up against their building, which is good. But we want to do the best efforts and be good neighbors to the abutting people as well.
Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
I think at this point, Alderwoman Lee, we're open to any questions that either you have, your staff has, or the community.
Let me just unmute myself. Thanks for all of that and going back through and providing some updates and answering some of the questions that came up last time. At this point, if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise your hand function here, and we'll call on you. And I ask that when you're called upon, please identify yourself. If you are a community member, if you live nearby or just have a concern from being in the neighborhood, please feel free to raise your hand and ask that. And I see Teresa McNamara. Why don't you go ahead?
Yes, I have a question. What is the name of this facility, this cold storage facility?
Jake, or one of the Karis team members, do you have the company is Karis Cold Storage, but I'll let Karis respond if there's a specific name that's would be identified for.
I have follow-up questions to that.
Yep,
Sure.
Go ahead.
The follow-up would be, are you a new company? Have you been around elsewhere?
Yeah, so we own actually a building down at 43rd and Ashland it used to be called Ashland Cold Storage. They've now put the new name of the tenant on that, which is called Artico. And so I think the name of this building, if Artico were to say grow into this building as a business, I guess that would be the name of the building as well.
Okay, I have some more questions. You said that you not only use water, because if you just used water, the whole building would freeze. What else are you using? Antifreeze? Or what is it that you're using in order to keep the building as cold as you want it?
This is
I-
Mike Cody with
yeah,
Where
please.
Malcolm. I can address that. The systems that are utilized are generally CO2 based systems for refrigeration. Is that what you're?
Yeah, my issue would be leaks. Is it a danger to our community? What about runoff? Is it gonna be going into our sewer system? All of these things I start thinking about. Now, the other part to that is, I don't know if you know that you are planting a new building in our community that is already overburdened with plenty of companies that are already here, and they're not being held accountable for, when they end up having a dump, a waste of some sort, a leak of some sort. And I don't know if you realize that you're coming into a community that is already overburdened. We have a high risk of asthma. So having a new building come into our community is a problem, because now you're talking about trucks, more trucks coming into our community. I have a problem with it. I live right next to Mad Asphalt, and it's not only one company that's near my home. We got quite a few all along Pershing Road because it's an industrial corridor. You're right on the corner there of 38th and Ashland, so that is a problem area also. So that was I'm worried about you all coming in, honestly. I'd like to see some history of ARCO, and I would like to see the reports that I could show someone and what they think of it. When there was a study on the air quality, is it a cumulative study, or is it just that one area where you are at? Because whatever you end up using, I'm pretty sure you have some kind of exhaust coming out of your building, and that, whatever that might be, is going into the atmosphere. And how does that play into what's already in our air quality?
Sure. There's a number of things there, so maybe let's try to break that down and
Sure.
see if we can get you responses to the different concerns. I know, Mike, you were gonna give us some additional information in terms of refrigerant coolants and how that system works.
Well, I think cold storage has come a long way, right? I think the buildings that we build today are a lot more efficient and a lot less harmful to the environment. The EPA has done a great job in regulating the refrigerants that are used and the chemicals that can be utilized. And without getting too scientific, they're very safe. They've come a long way, and they are more environmentally friendly. They use some power, so there's definitely some electricity generation, but also with the truck traffic, there are ways that complement reducing the truck idling, trailers, rather than having to have a car, or a tractor idle to keep the refrigeration equipment running. There are methods that are engaged where you can plug the trailer in and then thereby able to turn off the trailer. So I guess, I understand your questions, but I would like to say a new building of a refrigerated cold storage becomes a lot more efficient and a lot less obtrusive to the environment. And I think that this is a good addition to the community. I really do.
Sarah and Jenny, I'll start with Sarah. Do you want to, I know you touched on it, but do you want to revisit the points you made on cumulative impact and how you accounted for that in the study? And then I'll ask Jenny to do the same.
Yes, sure. So as part of the CDOT standards for how we conduct a traffic study, we are required not only to think about how much traffic this development will add, but how much additional growth in the area may be expected. And for this particular project, we did that in two ways. One, we added in traffic for known developments in the area. So for this particular project, when we were doing our work, the Amazon delivery station at Ashland and 35th was not yet complete. So we took the projected additional traffic from that project and added it in to our transportation network. And then we also applied a general growth rate that we obtained from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. It's the metropolitan planning organization for the entire Chicago metro area. And they maintain a long-term model looking out to year 2050, thinking about what kind of growth is going to happen in all the different parts of our region. And that informs their expectation of how much traffic growth will occur in this area. So we then layered that on top of our COVID adjusted traffic counts to arrive at what our future traffic projections would be, looking at that cumulative condition.
Yeah, and would it be fair to say that a cold storage facility in the universe of industrial uses is a relatively light traffic generator, based on your experience and what you see with different industrial uses? Compare it with certainly a fulfillment center or a heavy industrial use.
That is what our data shows, and it is worth mentioning. I didn't want to get too far down into the data, but it is worth mentioning that we actually used traffic trip generation data for a standard warehouse use, which is a little more conservative than for a cold storage use. And we did that because there's simply more information out there that makes that data more statistically valid. And it meant that we were assuming a little more traffic coming from this facility got added onto these streets. And so that would have been carried both through our traffic analysis and used to inform the air quality study, though Jenny, correct me if that's not true.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
So this is Jenny, and I wanted to follow up on the question about cumulative impacts. And I understand the concern with a neighborhood being so close to industrial areas, and you have overlapping impacts with existing facilities that have emissions that they're generating, and we're taking an existing site and putting in something new that's going to be, generating emissions. And I first wanted to clarify that the modeling that we conducted was for all of the emissions from our project. So when you were talking about, emissions leaking out of the building into the air and the atmosphere, all of that was accounted for in the modeling. So all of the results that that I presented was for all of the emissions generated both on the site and also along the roadways for the trucks when they travel along Ashland and Pershing and the other roads that we evaluated. With respect to cumulative impacts, at this point, with the way the guidance was written for evaluating a project's impacts, if we could demonstrate that the project was below those small significance thresholds, that was considered complete. However, I will point out that with local ambient monitors that I was looking at for the area that are nearby in Cicero, the background concentrations for both NO2, PM2.5, and PM10 are all well below sort of the national ambient air quality standards, which are what are determining whether a area is in attainment or not, which means if you're below those standards, that the air quality is deemed satisfactory. Now, I'm not saying, that's currently federal guidance. I understand that people are going to argue about whether or not those standards should be lower or not, but as of today, the area is in attainment, and with the insignificant addition of the project's emissions, this project wouldn't add onto the existing monitoring of the area and cause a violation of the air quality standards for the region. So hopefully that answers your question about that.
Thanks.
Yes, it does. And yes, what the US EPA and IEPA and our city is not taking into consideration is they haven't revisited this issue in regards to how much emissions these companies should be spewing. And so, again, like I said, a new company coming in is just another polluter coming through our community, adding on to the emissions that we already have in our air. So again, I say it's a problem for all of us that live here in the area.
Thanks for your questions, Teresa. Just in the interest of time, I know we have at least 3
Okay.
other people who have their hands raised. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go ahead and move on to Matt. Matt Malik, you're up.
I can actually put myself further in a queue since I asked some questions last time. I'll let
Okay,
other people go
sure.
first.
Okay, Annie?
Hello. So I have just 2 questions, if I might. One, I wanted to revisit the issue of demolition. I'm kind of foolish and I accidentally walked to your site for the meeting today, which is why I'm on my phone right now. And I'm noticing that the setback that you're talking about, I mean, the building is touching the sidewalk right now. So in terms of the demolition, like how much is that going to shut down Ashland would be question 1. And question 2, what is happening to those materials? It's not just an issue of what comes into our community, it's what we export from our community. That is a very old looking building. And I'm curious as to what is going to be happening to any metals that could leach into the environment, how they're going to be disposed of. The second question I had is, we've spent a lot of time talking about ways in which you're trying to assure us that the development is not going to harm our community. I'm wondering if you can tell us anything positive that it might bring to our community.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, Rob, let me jump in there just real quick, and then I'll
Absolutely.
lead up to Mike
Please.
Stella for the demo to talk about Ashland. But I think an important note about leaving the community, obviously part of the standards of demo, Mike can talk about that. I was going to talk about, I thought where you were going with that was a beautiful old historic building that has some character and charm. We've actually been able to reuse some of the bricks on some of the buildings we've demoed in the past. One of our good friends owns Stockyard Bricks right around the corner. But I think from a positive note, you know, one of the things that this building is going to provide is food to the community, not just immediate surrounding areas. Our architect talked about, you know, the freezer temperatures in the building, but you know, really this is a hub for food. And you know, while there's other things that go through cold warehouses, it's 90+% going to be food and or pharmaceuticals.
I'm so sorry, you said you didn't know who the user was, is that right?
We don't know who the exact user
So
is.
so then you can't be sure what, like,
Well, I can be sure that
there.
the user is going to use the facility as a freezer cooler. And so, you know, because of that, I know, you know, within reason, what's going to go in and out of the building. And so I think, again, since we own the building just a few blocks down, and seeing what's going in and out of that building, and seeing how that building is already at capacity, serving the needs of the Chicago land community, but also the local community. I think it's really important to note the jobs that these create, which are typically higher paying than traditional warehouse jobs because folks are working in a much colder environment. Although in January that might not be the case. But also, you know, this food is coming in and out of the community one way or another. And so I think that what's nice when we continue to build the infrastructure of these food warehouses, the trucks are actually traveling, you know, less distances than they are if they're having to come from, you know, say surrounding states to fill the same needs. And so I think that, you know, this is, you know, as we all saw from the pandemic, what, you know, how strained the supply chains were and how strained grocery store shelves were, you know, we've just seen, you know, more and more demand for these types of facilities in urban locations that, are really acting as a backup, to the grocery store as those shelves get emptied. At your local grocery store, this building, this facility would help fill them up behind it. Mike, Stella, could you just jump in real quick on the proximity of the building to Ashland sidewalk on the demo?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's no question. The existing building has a 0 setback. It's right on top of the sidewalk. Just like what was done on the 8-story building we did down at 35th, the city requires us to put up scaffolding to protect the pedestrian walkways, create a covered pedestrian walkway. That scaffolding goes all the way up to the top of the building that we're starting to demo. And it helps give a protection at the point where we are pulling in the material from the outs, again, from the perimeter inward. So we're not knocking it down, we're pulling it inward. And then as the building starts to come down and that material keeps moving inward and downward, the scaffolding comes down, and it comes down in tiers to kind of go along with the progress of the building. There's also a question, and Jake is absolutely correct. A lot of the stuff that is the brick, as the materials come down, be it brick, concrete, steel, whatnot, the demo contractor separates that, and quite a bit of the brick is salvaged, and that brick company actually takes that, and that goes into some other buildings in the areas and whatnot. The concrete material gets recycled and crushed on site, and we try to use that on the site in areas that we need to have stone and backfill and structural backfill. So we control that. The steel gets separated and removed from the site and hauled away to, and it's usually to like a scrap. So that gets recycled. So quite a lot of the demo gets recycled as part of the process. It's just the nature of what it does. It's very similar to what was done, again, the old Wrigley buildings down at 35th and Ashland a couple of years ago.
And I'll just jump on and Mike elaborate if you think you need to, but to the extent that there is, and we don't know if there is, but to the extent there would be any environmentally sensitive materials, those all have to be contained and dealt with pursuant to federal EPA regulations. So if that were the case, the demo contractor would have to contain those materials, remove them to the site. They're already there to the extent they exist. So it would clean up those materials that maybe historically were allowed years ago when this building was built that wouldn't be. So if there's asbestos, if there's lead-based paint, those things all have to be dealt with and contained and removed from the site. So if there are environmental issues separate and apart from the recycling, this new project will clean that site to a higher standard than it's ever been. I did want to add to the benefits too, because I think that's a really important question. In addition to the jobs, this is a site that's been vacant for a number of years, is likely assessed on the city's tax rolls as vacant property. It's a tremendously underutilized site. It is, at this point. So by redeveloping the site, it will put it back into a productive use. It will allow for taxes that benefit the entire city to be generated. The other thing is, if you've walked by the site, and I know you indicated you did, there's scaffolding up there now. So this is a site that's obviously been identified along Ashland. It's been identified as having some structural integrity issues. So by redeveloping the site, you get a building that is clearly dilapidated, obsolete, removed from the site, and put it back into, again, a productive use. The last thing I wanted to point out, and it kind of goes to a couple of the questions that have been raised as it relates to use and so forth. This site is zoned, that I may have mentioned in the beginning, PMD 8A, which means it's part of that planned manufacturing district. And there's a number of uses that are already deemed to be permitted by the city. What is being proposed here, we believe, is a perfect fit for this site and is one of the lesser intensive uses that could go on this site. As I said, it fits within the warehousing, wholesaling, and freight movement use category. The PMD right now does allow for all the way up to intensive manufacturing as a permitted use as of right to go on that. So we think this is a much better use based on the use patterns and what's allowed under the city's zoning than some of the other uses that could be put there. And I guess the last part of that point is this site will get reutilized and ultimately redeveloped. We're hoping that this is the best development, and we think it is, for this particular site. It's not a question of will this site remain vacant in perpetuity, but we're trying to put forth a plan here and have gone through great lengths to put forth a thoughtful plan that hopefully will be a benefit to the community. And we certainly have outlined some of those benefits. And in the same breath, we've also tried to mitigate any significant impacts that might happen as a result of it. So I just wanted to add that into some of the other information that was shared.
Okay, thank you so much. Just real quick, you've mentioned jobs a few times. Is there any figures about how many jobs we're talking about?
Karis, somebody from the Karis team will have you address that.
Probably in the 30 to 50 range, depending on how many shifts are run and how many different rooms are in the building.
Thanks so much.
Right. Matt, are you okay waiting, or do you want to go next?
I definitely still have questions, but I said I'd go last, so I'll go
Okay,
last.
I just double checking. Anna, you're next.
Yeah, I wanted to know if you had looked into putting this in a different PMD on the north side, such as the Lincoln Park, Ravenswood, or Fulton Market PMDs.
I don't have the site selection information on this, but
I mean, we've looked at sites all across the country, so, and including all across this great city, and a lot of times the zoning doesn't allow for it. A lot of times, you know, high rises or multifamily apartment developers are willing to pay a lot more, and a lot of times it's just not as good of a fit as it is, you know, for this site, and you know, based on, you know, the neighbors, and based on where some of the product that'll be put into this building is being produced in the stockyards, you know, as well as, you know, being, you know, around facilities that are doing similar activities. You know, some of that, you know, think about co-working spaces or, you know, shared office spaces. There's, you know, some of these facilities that are nearby each other. There are a lot of, you know, they're able to share, you know, trucking routes. And so there's, you know, it's a lot less impact on the environment when a truck is able to stop at multiple buildings or pick up from multiple buildings in the same area. And that's just kind of how, you know, these, you know, this specific area has, you know, has seemed to develop.
Anna, did you have any other questions?
No, I'm just overwhelmed with how the racism is built into this process.
I appreciate your question. Appreciate you joining us. Matt, I think that takes us to you.
Okay, full circle. Well, first, thanks for getting back in those questions regarding the truck study. I definitely was looking forward to hearing what the truck counts, what the head counts were, things like that. I have a couple questions kind of about the status of the project, where it stands right now, and then I'll get into some details. I know we're also at the end of the call, so I'll try and keep this briefer. Is this building or this parcel still owned by I'm gonna pronounce it wrong, Abjuris, or has Karis taken over ownership of these parcels?
No, Karis does not own it. They are the contract purchaser.
Got it. And so, because they're under contract and they will not be the final tenants, it will not be Karis that's running the operations of this facility once it's built and the tenant's been found.
So do you want to address the operational side of it, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that's correct. Karis does not operate these facilities. We're a real estate owner and landlord.
Got it. Okay, cool. Just kind of curious, kind of what the sequence of Abjuris to whoever the final tenant is. Unfortunately, I think this kind of takes away some of the questions that I was going to ask, which is usually the economic development questions that always come up when these facilities are put into frequently the very same place. And it, as far as community member goes, we often like to see some level of commitment that a percentage of those jobs will go to people that live in the area. It's usually table stakes for, I feel like, community buy-in. And unfortunately, we can't get that guarantee just since we don't really know who the final person is, that's going to be operating this is. I have a couple just like quick traffic questions and then just a couple comments. But as far as traffic goes, what is the route that the heavy industry is going to be taking to get between the facility and highway? Is that known based on the traffic study, or is that really ultimately down to whoever ends up taking over this property?
So we have some reasonably good estimates of what the routing is likely to be based on what the connections are to the interstate. We expect that the trucks are likely to be coming longer distances and therefore traveling via the nearby interstates. And not every route in this area provides adequate clearance to get to and from those interstates. So Pershing does provide sufficient clearance under the rail viaduct to the east to get over to the Dan Ryan. We estimated that about 60% of the truck traffic would come that way and that the remainder would travel via Ashland, going toward the south, toward other industrial users, or toward the north to ultimately connect with I-55.
Yeah, reason I asked just because knowing that of those two, Ashland not being managed by IDOT, it just would end up putting a lot more of the damage to the roads by the heavy trucks onto the local community for Ashland. I think there's certainly more of an interest in for it to go down Pershing just because it doesn't shift the burden onto residents. But I just
just to chime in on that,
Yeah.
Ashland, I believe in this location is under jurisdiction of Cook County.
Yeah, Cook County versus IDOT. This is
Correct.
to understand it, but I think just the final comment, just because I know it's past 7 p.m. Sorry, just reading the comment that came in here. I think one of the biggest disconnects that often comes up on these calls between community members and the developers is that in abstract, if we're just choosing the site, yes, it's definitely a lower impact than fulfillment facility. And I think that if we were choosing between that and nothing, it'd be an easier thing for me as a community member to feel good about. But just particularly in this instance, it's not just this facility, it's this facility on top of the Amazon facility that has already gone in this area. So we're not really even comparing those two. That was also owned and developed by the same owners as this parcel. I'm not saying it's Karis, but Abjuris was in charge of the 35th and Ashland redevelopment of the Wrigley building, and this whole corridor, despite being flagged as endangered buildings by Preservation Chicago and all being 100-year-old masonry buildings that have a really important part of Chicago's history, are all getting torn down because they don't have that landmark status. I know, it's not up to Karis to determine whether it gets landmarked, but in pretty much every McKinley Park development plan, it has gone towards wanting these buildings to be adaptively reused. And it's very, I think, unfortunate as a community member to see all of them go to the wrecking ball one by one. And then the construction of one gets used to validate the construction of another that was used for Kugel Foods up on Ashland. And I definitely suspect that might be used for, the Imperial Campbell branch building next door. I know that's been mentioned. And, I would really feel more sympathetic to this proposal if it was the only cold storage facility in the area. But it's not, as has been referenced on this call. This would be the second one on a short stretch, all going through Ashland to get to the highway. I know some of it's going to go down Pershing. But it's just really, really hard for me to see what the community benefit is, particularly compared to if we hold out for something else. I'm definitely in favor of something getting built here. I'd love for it to be using the existing buildings, but it just feels like this is a development that's going to get snuck in before the stockyards, industrial corridor gets redeveloped, or they'd go through the modernization plan. I know that there's a bill going through the state house that would require a pretty heavy fee for new polluters in the area. I know it's a low impact, but I think that will qualify for this development. And that would be only for environmental justice areas, which I mean, this area clearly is. Across the streets, like 90% people of color. It's mostly families. It's just kind of exasperating to see this come in at the same spot as all the other ones are coming in, that the same developer who bought this and put on their site that it was supposed to be retail, which is what the community wants, is going to make a handsome profit on it. I'm not against there being profit for these buildings, but it's just very clearly that they saw success out of 35th and Ashland putting that fulfillment facility in there, that they just want to keep doing it while these buildings are not landmarked. So I know there's no question in there. This is just a long speech, but just as a community member, it's just very distressing.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your feelings on all this. And I know you show up to every single one of these meetings. I know how much you care. At this point in the process, Karis is going to be able to move forward with their site plan review with the city. So this is not a done deal as of this point, and we're going to continue to watch this. And I think, appreciate everybody from the Karis side being here, answering questions. Please take to heart everything that you heard on this call. We've got a lot of really committed people in our community who are looking out for the benefit of everybody here. I think they asked a lot of really valid questions. Rob and team, if you can, because I don't think we actually got an answer to the chemicals that are going to be used for the coolant, and then what sort of safety measures there are for in the event of any accidents or anything like that. I think it would be useful. I think that that's something that folks on this call would be interested in knowing, just what the exact chemicals are. I'm not a sciencey person, so I won't know what they are from anything, but I think it matters that we share that information. So if you can pass that through to me, I'm happy to share it with the folks here that are on the call. If you want that information and I don't already have your email, why don't you go ahead and just drop it into the chat, and I'll make sure any information that we get subsequent to this call is shared back out with the folks that joined the call today. I'm just mindful of the time. We're 20 minutes over when we said that we would be. I'm happy that we continued the conversation and we didn't have another meeting that we had to stop for. So with that, I'll leave the channel open for another minute or two for anybody else who wants to drop in an email. Thank you, Anne and Anna, and anybody else who wants it. Just let me know and we'll follow up. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Alderman Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's comments and the time they took to attend the meeting on their own time. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Very
Jenny.
well. Much appreciated. Thanks to all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.